следно. Гералд Кнаус, председател на Европската иницијатива за стабилност, со неговиот предлог и неговата идеја за решавање на македонско-бугарскиот спор, а потоа одиме со министрите за надворешни работи на Србија и Босна и аналитичарот од Црна Гора во врска со импактот од изборните резултати во Соединетите Американски држави. Да го погледнеме Гералд Кнаус.
So, Gerald, here we are with the problems again, this time with our eastern neighbor. Do you believe that Bulgaria will block the Macedonian accession talks?
Well, what we are seeing here is an issue of fundamental importance for the whole Balkans and for the whole European Union. It's not just about Bulgaria and North Macedonia. And the issue is very simple. Let's assume 90% of Bulgarians believe strongly that what their government is saying is right, that Macedonian identity is a result of manipulations by Tito's communists. Let's assume 90% of Bulgarians really believe this. I once wrote a book. I lived in Bulgaria. I wrote this book 25 years ago, where I described at that time a lot of Bulgarians in the media, in politics, believing this. Now, we will not change the opinions of the Bulgarians.
That's for sure. Okay.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So the question then is, can and should a country use the accession process to get another country to accept its version of history? And here the answer is very simple. This cannot succeed. So the point is not changing the way the Bulgarians look at history. The point is making clear that no country, not Croatia, not Romania, not Hungary, not Bulgaria, can make its interpretation of history a requirement for neighbors who want to join the EU. That's like Germany forcing the Czechs or Poles before they join the EU to revise their attitude to the expulsion of Germans after World War II. You know, millions of Germans were expelled.
Gerald, you're Austrian, am I right?
Yes.
So what are going to be your feelings if Germans ask Austrians to accept that they have a German's roots?
Well, the paradox is this. Until the 1960s, only a minority of Austrians in opinion polls said that there is an Austrian nation. By 1970, it was a majority. Today, it's almost everyone. So if today any neighbor would say to the Austrians, in 1960, there was a doubt. You yourself were not sure. And for this reason, your identity today is fake. 99% of Austrians would say, we are what we feel. And we feel Austrian. This is true everywhere in the world.
But
and if a big neighbor tries to put pressure on you, you feel even more Austrian.
But then there was a comment from the Bulgarians on your Twitter, I think, that Austrians do not pretend that they speak Austrians. They accept that they speak German.
Well,
you see some...
It's complicated. It's complicated. After World War II, when the Austrian government wanted to help this creation of a strong identity, the language in school, the subject, was not called German. It was called language of instruction. on purpose. But of course, the thing is, it is silly for any country to tell its neighbors, not just silly, it's dangerous, because it creates tension. For any country to tell its neighbors what they should be.
So yeah. How do you?
There is no objective difference between Montenegrin being a language, right, and the Austrians deciding today that their language is German. It's up to the Austrians. They could call it Austrian. Yeah. The Montenegrins could call it Serbian, but it's up to them. It's up to each country to determine who people are and what their language is called. And that is the basis of respect.
So having in mind your European Austrian experience, your Bulgarian experience living there for 2 years, so how do you understand Bulgarian position?
Well, I think if you go to Bulgarian museums and if you read Bulgarian school books and if you follow Bulgarian media over the last decades, you will see that a lot of Bulgarians are genuinely convinced that Macedonians
is the terrorist fabrication.
Bulgarian. Yes, that this is a fabrication. And so I don't think you will change their opinion, even if historians will argue, and there are brilliant Bulgarian historians at Oxford, at the best universities in the world, that are saying, listen, they are complaining about the government in Sofia using history. They say you cannot use history this way as a weapon. But most Bulgarians in Bulgaria will continue to believe what they learned in school. This is fine. Most Brits believe Napoleon was a bad force in history, and most French believe Napoleon was a great leader. That is fine. But the only way countries can work together, create respect, create friendship, solve problems in the future, is if they simply accept that on some issues there will be differences of opinion. That's normal.
So, what's the solution, Gerald? What's the way out?
The solution is very simple. It's very simple. There's only one solution, and that is that the Bulgarian government recognizes and the Bulgarian public recognizes that if they insist on Macedonians qualifying their identity or on Macedonians accepting the Bulgarian view of their history, that then Macedonians will say no, and there will be no accession, which would be a tragedy for Europe, for Bulgaria, and for North Macedonia. So the lesson, the message from other member states and from the Germans as EU presidency should be very simple. We can all differ on our views on history, but it must not become a weapon in politics and the criteria for accession. And this is not just for North Macedonia. This is also true for Bosnia-Herzegovina, for Albania, for Serbia. We cannot enforce identity issues and views of history as part of accession.
Having in mind that everybody on the Balkans pretend to speak a lot about European values, if we are talking within a context of European values, what's the way out? How to resolve this kind of situation?
There was an example in Germany when the Czech Republic applied for membership. Some in Germany said that the Czech Republic should declare the Beneš Decree, which was passed after World War II, to expel the Germans, that this was illegal. And they should say this was wrong. But then in Germany you had a debate, and the leaders said, look, we cannot force the Czechs in the accession process to adopt our view, of which we are convinced. We have to have dialogue outside of the accession process. So let's have historians meet. Let's have students meet. Let's have citizens meet. But in the accession process, we will not enforce our view of history. And that's the only way you can solve this. The only way.
So to
And it's
accept,
good if this is clarified right at the beginning.
so to accept the different points of view about some historical moments, or that
Yes,
are.
because this is normal. This is how in Ireland, Catholics and Protestants have different views of history, but they live together. They have to live together. They have to have dialogue. It's good to discuss it, but you cannot start by one community forcing the other to adopt its point of view. It's like the dialogue between a believing Muslim, a believing Christian, and a believing Jew. They can talk, they can be friends. But you cannot become friends if one of them says, you first have to admit that your religion is wrong, because I believe my religion is right. If this is the dialogue, it ends in tension. It breaks down. And that is true for identity and history.
So it's obvious that Germans are very eager to find some kind of compromise in order to avoid the unfortunate situation as a new embargo on Macedonian membership talks. Do you think that Germans are going to be successful in their efforts to do so?
I think it is very important to be crystal clear on the side of Europeans. This is not an issue of historical scholarship. It is an issue of respect of different opinions. And neither now nor later in the accession process can such issues be important. This is not legitimate. And I think the Germans are in the best position to make this point now. It is very important, also for other countries in the Balkans. Because if this idea that EU members can force their view on others is not removed, the accession process is dead for everyone. But this would be a tragedy. Look around Europe. We have a war in Ukraine. We have a war in Armenia, Azerbaijan. We have a war in Syria. We had a war in Georgia. We have a war in Libya. We have a war in Iraq. Tensions everywhere. We need European Union, and the Balkans needs a European perspective.
But
At this time more than ever. So Bulgarians need to see that.
Well, I don't think that Zakhariyeva, as a foreign minister, do not understand what you said now. But still, she is very clear that they are going to block Macedonia accession talks. That's it. That's their right as a member state.
Well, it's very important to state very clearly that this simply means not only for North Macedonia, but for the whole Balkans, that there will not be accession. Because if Croatia enforces its view of history on Bosnia-Herzegovina, if
or Serbia,
Serbia, the accession is dead. Because on those issues, you can discuss with respect. You can talk about history. You can learn something. It's interesting for me to see how Bulgarians see the Balkan history and how Macedonians see Balkan history. It's interesting. But what you can't do is one side forcing its view on the others. That kills the process. And at a time of tension between Greece and Turkey, between the US and China, between Europe and Russia, to not see that Bulgaria needs a stable Balkans with friends. I mean, they say you are their brothers. So you don't want to fight with your brother. At this moment, you need to have a clear goal for the region, which is freedom of movement, integration, European Balkans. And the clarity for the Bulgarians, and this is what I hope the Germans are telling them, is there are no compromises. There are only two choices. You demand that the identity is part of the debate of accession, you kill the process. That's it.
You said clearly that if Bulgaria block Macedonia, EU policy on accession will collapse. So that's the consequences for the enlargement. What are going to be the consequences for Bulgaria as a member state and the EU as such?
Well, there is one area of the world where the EU has a massive interest and responsibility as the leading foreign policy actor. We saw in the last few years how the United States left the Balkans. You know, it's Donald Trump doesn't even know that the war between Kosovo and Serbia ended 20 years ago. Right? He said he brought the war to an end now. So the Americans at the moment don't care about the Balkans. Europe has to care. But if the accession process is not credible, then Europe also loses all influence. And that would be tragic, not just for Bulgaria, but for the whole European Union. So I think this is the kind of issue that President Macron, Chancellor Merkel, the leaders of the EU need to take very seriously, because it affects the credibility of Europe for the whole Balkan policy.
Do you believe that there is some hidden agenda behind this? I don't know.
No.
Other
interference. No, I lived in Bulgaria. I really like Bulgaria. I fought for Bulgaria to have visa-free travel to join the EU. I think it is great Bulgaria is in the EU. And I believe many Bulgarians really believe what they say about Macedonia, their history. They believe it. And I would say to them, this is fine. You know, there are differences of opinions. But you have to recognize that you are harming yourself, your neighbor, and Europe if you try to use the accession process, because it cannot work.
To end this conversation, Gerald, we have 1 week till the 10th of November when the EU is going to decide about Macedonian accession talks. So what's your prognosis?
Well, I think it's more important that this issue is clear and resolved before you start accession than starting accession this in November and December and then having this issue come back next year. It is more important to clearly state that historical issues, identity issues, cannot be part of accession. And if it takes a few more weeks, it is better to take the time and remove this than to make a fake compromise where next year, when you discuss about opening chapters, the issue of history comes back again.
You are very much, you're right. Gerald, it was a pleasure to talk to you again. Have a nice...
I wish you all the best, and I wish us all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Bye.
Bye.